I want to welcome you to the 2008 Election Lecture Series sponsored by the Department of Political Science and International Relations and the Department of Communication. Ralph Begleiter is the university's distinguished journalist in resident. He joined UD after 30 years of broadcast journalism experience, highlighted by 20 years as CNN's World Affairs correspondent. He has visited over 90 countries on 6 continents and has traveled with University of Delaware students to Cuba, South America, Turkey, and Antarctica. He conducts media workshops in several countries under the auspices of the U.S. Department of State. At CNN, he covered U.S. diplomacy, interviewed countless world leaders, hosted the global public affairs program, Global View, and co-anchored CNN's prestigious International Hour. He covered many historic events at the end of the 20th century, including virtually every high-level Soviet, Russian, American meeting, the Persian Gulf crisis in 1990-91, the Dayton-Bosnia Accords, Middle East peace efforts, and many UN and NATO summit meetings. He's received numerous press awards, including the Weintel Prize from Georgetown University's Graduate School for Foreign Service, one of diplomatic reporting's highest honors. Today, Professor Begleiter will be speaking on broadcast media and the campaign, the inside story.
Thanks very much, Betsy. Appreciate it. For purposes of this lecture, one of the other things I did for CNN was to cover American elections for a foreign audience. So trying to explain to people outside the U.S. what the Electoral College is and that whole strange system that we have in the United States. Today I'm going to focus your attention on the media, and I know you've been paying attention to a lot of other aspects of the campaign, but today don't think about the election, think about the media's coverage of the election. And no matter what happens tomorrow, it could be an historic election because of the election of a black president of the United States. It could be an historic election because of the election of a woman vice president. So either way, I'm sure you've heard the phrase historic many times. But for today's purposes, I'd like to point out that it's going to be a historic occasion for another reason related to the news media itself. We're moving away from the print media. People don't go to newsstands anymore to pick up the paper. How many of you picked up a physical newspaper today to read? Okay, about a dozen or so of you. The rest of you didn't do that. How many of you are reading some form of news content online? All right, so that's the historic shift we're about to observe. And it's the first time since 1960, since the presidential campaign in which John F. Kennedy was elected in 1960, when these media trends have flowered into full blossom in this election. Take a look at a bit of 1960.
Good evening. This is NBC News Election Central. For several million of us Americans, this is a most extraordinary election. By circumstances which must be obvious, I hereby speak for all those Americans who have adjusted to the immutable fact that come what may tonight, we shall be older than the President of the United States. And for any who might have harbored the so-called father image of the President, the switch to the young brother image may be a shocker. But we suggest you settle down now. Perhaps a pencil and a pad of paper you'll find helpful. You may choose to do a little dial twisting to see how our competitors are doing, but we hope and trust you'll be back. The very first returns are now beginning to pour in substantially, and those in just a moment.
Dial twisting. Anybody know what dial twisting is? You might want to do some dial twisting tonight. What are they talking about? Yes? Changing channels. When was the last time you changed channels by turning a dial? Doesn't happen anymore. It did happen in 1960. That was part of the technology that's changing. The other thing that's changing is that old fart journalists, people who have covered politics since 1960, like these two elderly gentlemen who wrote for the Baltimore Sun and the New York Times, and others who write for the Washington Post and other prestigious newspapers, are discovering that they're having to face competition from new kinds of journalists, some of them called citizen journalists, like the young woman who blogged in 2004 and sort of opened the arena for blogging. Another historical landmark was reached this year during the presidential conventions in August and early September, when world records were set for the number of television viewers, TV viewers, not web viewers now, who actually watched the conventions on television. That hasn't happened for many, many years. It was the largest media audience since Kennedy was inaugurated in 1961 after the 1960 election. So we've discovered that people are still interested in watching the political process, maybe some peculiarities about this year, but maybe other things at play as well. For example, during the conventions, we discovered that the vice presidential candidates had enormous draw. The Sarah Palin speech at the Republican National Convention was the largest audience ever given to a vice presidential candidate in the United States. People tuned in droves to see who Sarah Palin was, to find out what she meant for the campaign. And because of that draw of Sarah Palin, CNN had the largest audience of any television network, bar none, on that night in early September. That was a record for a cable news operation which had never previously beat out a broadcast news operation in terms of the number of viewers. So Biden and Palin, who were largely unknown figures for most of the country, became well known as a result of their appearances on national television, cable television. The Palin factor has played into the actual election campaign as well, and you can see that large audience suddenly evolve in the public opinion polls on who's winning the election at any point during the campaign. There it is, the Palin factor. As soon as she appears on the screen, John McCain shoots up in the public opinion polls at the end of August, early September, stayed there for a very short period of time, but it was an enormous boost for him because so many Americans had watched her on TV. As you can see, it kind of faded toward the end of the campaign, and that's where we are now. The Palin effect has worn off, but it was something that was instigated, in effect, by the news media's coverage of her speech. Here are some key elements that have changed since the 1960 campaign. In the olden days of television and election campaign coverage, there were only 3 television networks, ABC, NBC, and CBS. You didn't have any choice but those 3. You had to watch one of those 3 to pay any attention and broadcast to the election. Today, you've got 10 or more news networks. We're talking non-web media now. 10 or more channels covering the conventions. So tomorrow night at Election Central, you'll have the opportunity to really enjoy a smorgasbord of interpretation and presentation of how the elections are turning out. The conventions were carried, believe it or not, wall to wall in the 1960s and beyond. Television networks turned on their cameras and their live coverage at the beginning of the conventions and stayed on for 4, 5, 6 hours into the wee hours of the morning covering the conventions because they believed it was a public service and that people would want to know what was going on at the conventions. Today, forget about it. The longest coverage you'll get is 1 hour on any of the broadcast networks. In order to watch the entire event, you'd have to watch something on the web, like C-SPAN on the web or some other program that's carrying it entirely on the web. Here's another enormous development that has occurred since 1960, and this one's even much more recent. To you, having a TiVo or a DVR or a video iPod is second nature. You assume it today. But as recently as the 1990s, it was not easily possible to time delay your viewership of these major campaign events. You had to put in a physical videotape. You had to play it back in real time. It took forever. You couldn't make edits. You couldn't jump from one point to another. Now, time shifting is an enormous factor in elections and has led to a factor in the voting as well. Now you can time shift your vote. Many, many states have early voting, as you know, and that's a factor that is a result, I believe, of the fact that you can now watch the campaign at your convenience, not at some broadcast editor's convenience. Of course, there was no internet prior to the 1990s, so all of those technologies that you've become fully accustomed to simply did not exist back in those days. So in the media, the shift has been away from old-fashioned media. They're packing up the newspapers in paper bags and throwing them in the recycling containers. Newspapers are going out of business like crazy. Just last week, the Christian Science Monitor, a 100-plus-year-old newspaper, decided it's not going to publish in print anymore. It's only going to publish on the web. The broadcasters are having a similar problem. ABC, NBC, and CBS have seen a long decline in their viewership. This particular chart only shows it through 2004, but believe me, it has continued into now. And the shift is occurring from broadcast television to cable television. And there's a substantive implication of that shift. It's not just, oh, well, what channel are we going to watch? It makes a difference to how people perceive the election campaign. You might, for example, tune in to the election on CNN, or you might tune in on Fox News or MSNBC or CNBC or BBC or any one of the other television channels that are now carrying election coverage. But here's what the implication is. It takes the role of the election or the importance of the election out of the hands of every person watching television and puts it in the hands of the political junkies. And believe it or not, you guys in this room would be considered political junkies. Anybody who pays attention to the election campaign every single week on Mondays at noon has got to be classified as a political junkie. But there are people who spend all their waking time watching the web, watching television, going on YouTube, observing what's going on the campaign. And so what we've seen now, here's the substantive difference in the shift in media. We've seen the information flow go from available to everybody when they twist their dial and tune in the evening news every day to available only to the junkies. The ordinary voters aren't getting it. Ordinary voters, if they watch the network news at all, they might get 5 minutes, 10 minutes at most a day of news about the election. The rest of the time they're spending watching sports, gambling, pornography, email, whatever they do with their internet time and their television time, that's what they're doing with it. They're not paying attention to politics. So you've shifted the audience from the people who are very interested in politics, have all moved to cable television and the web, and people who say, I don't have any time for politics. I'm not interested in it. I don't do politics. Those people are getting less and less information about it. Some of them, however, of course, still vote, and that raises the question of whether they're voting on the basis of good information or not. Here's another divide that you probably haven't thought about very much. Let's look at some, across the bottom are a list of mixture of mainstream media and alternative media and new media, internet, all sorts of news sources. Now let's take a look at who's watching or paying attention to these sources grouped by age. You won't be surprised to see the red lines, 18 to 29, that's your age group, of course. Look at the internet line, enormous, that's where you're getting most of your news and information. So of surprising note to me is the cable TV news line right here. I'm surprised to know that so many 18 to 29-year-olds are getting their campaign information from cable news, because the average age of a cable news station's viewer is 64. The average age. But apparently during campaign season, at least many of you are tuning in to cable news. As you can see, there's still a pretty good group of people in your age group who are still using newspapers, daily newspapers, who are still paying attention to network news, and who are in fact getting their political news from local news channels. Now let's look at the other age groups for just a second. 30 to 49, believe it or not, that's younger than me. That age group tends to shift toward what you would characterize as more traditional media, okay? Much less internet, about half the internet use in the age group of 30 to 49. Think about what that means substantively. If you know some people who are 30 or older, they're not your parents if they're 30, but your parents might be in the bottom end of that group, toward 49. It won't be surprising to you that your parents are paying attention to more traditional media, but 30-year-olds, 35-year-olds also paying attention to traditional media. And here are the old guys. That's me in that group, okay? 50 plus. Still buying newspapers. Can you imagine? I get a morning newspaper on my front door every single day, and believe it or not, I actually read it. Yes, I read the web version also, but I read the print version at the breakfast table. It's older people who are still watching the network news, and that's why when you watch ABC, NBC, or CBS News, you will see a lot of laxative commercials and, all that stuff old people use that they need to have, and medications and so on is on there. Look at the challenge. Look at the difference on internet, and this is, I think, perhaps the one that just focus your attention on most. Many of you think, and I think probably some of you would write in a paper in my class or some other class, we have all this information at our fingertips. We have nothing to do but ask, and we're inundated by information. The thing to remember is that many, many Americans don't get their campaign information through that method. So it's okay for you to think that way, but in terms of the broad electorate, the people who will be actually making the decision tomorrow on election day, many of those people, including those 30 and over, are not getting as much information from the internet as probably you would have imagined. So there's that internet figure, okay? And a little bit of a surprise to me was this one. I would have thought you guys would be way up there, late night TV and Comedy Central. Nah, not so much. Not getting so much of your campaign information from those particular sources. So, okay, it's fun to watch Sarah Palin and Tina Fey on Saturday Night Live. It's great. I do it too. We all do it. But it's not where we get our sources of information for making the decision on the vote. What about political blogs? Who's reading them? Just take a look at this. It's kind of interesting, I think. It'll give you a new perspective as well on whether people really are reading political blogs. Notice that senior citizens who are using the internet, those who, of that small number using the internet, the 3/4 of them are reading political blogs. They love that stuff. Conservatives love political blogs. People who are not college graduates love political blogs. And then there are the age groups up there on the top. Notice how many women read political blogs. Interesting division, I think, okay? But the other thing to note about this chart is that those who are reading them are less than a majority, and all but men are just barely a majority, and under 30s, 57. I was just flipping. I thought the gray was the people who are reading them. This gives you, in my view, a perspective on how, what I want to say is that political blogs are not as influential as we sometimes think they are. They're out there, they got a lot of information out there, but they're not reaching as many people as we sometimes think they are reaching. And that's worth just keeping in the back of your head as well. All right, key piece of the media puzzle in a political campaign is advertising. Maybe you've heard this before, but I can't overemphasize it. There isn't another single source of information about candidates in an election campaign that is more important to voters than political advertising. Voters get more information from political ads about candidates than they get from any other source. So it's those ads that are having an enormous effect on what people do on election day. And that's why the Obama and McCain campaigns this year have spent zoodles of money on political ads. Obama has just about doubled the amount of money that McCain has spent on political ads. The Republican Party, which is this brown line in the middle here, has way outspent the non-Obama campaign Democratic funding, which is such a small line. It's $623,000 there. It's such a small line it barely shows up on the graph, the Democratic National Committee spending. And then other groups, the blue line at the top, the $54 million, is not necessarily affiliated with either McCain or Obama or the Democrats or the Republicans. They might be animal rights groups who've put on a political ad or some other kind of interest group that does that. Just look at the dollar amounts of money there. We're talking, it's actually just over $400 million spent on political ads in just this one campaign year alone. Think of how much money that is, $400 million. Here's where it's being spent. All right, this is the Obama campaign television. These are broadcast television ads paid for by the Obama campaign. So it's a smaller number, 145 million, because all that other money from McCain and the other groups is not included in this chart. The biggest bubbles show you where the most money of political advertising is being spent. You can see a vast swath of the country doesn't get any advertising at all. Take a look at California. It's the most populous state in the country, but it's got almost no advertising by the Obama campaign. Because why waste their money on a state that's going to vote for him anyway? Okay? 145 million, there's Philadelphia, $13 million dropped in Philadelphia alone. How many television stations are there in Philadelphia? Well, there's the 3 networks, there's the Fox station, a couple of other independents. I don't really know the answer to my own question there, but I would guess that there probably are fewer than a dozen stations in Philadelphia. So that's a lot of money being dropped in the pockets of the stations in one city alone who are carrying these political ads. Now, keep your eyes on this chart. I'm going to dissolve very slowly between the Obama spending and the McCain spending. try to focus on a couple of metropolitan areas and see how the two campaigns have differed in terms of, oh, sorry, there's D.C., 14 million, okay? And I want to show you Florida also down here, $30 million on Florida alone. Okay, 1/5 of the money spent in Florida by the Obama campaign. Now, here comes the McCain campaign. All right, those battleground states in the Northeast are still where they're dumping their money. To hold on to a couple of western states, the McCain campaign has dumped a lot of money in Nevada and Colorado. Also dumped a lot of money in Florida. You can just look at where they're spending their money and draw the political conclusion about where the race is tightest tomorrow night. You can pick out the battleground states on the basis of where the campaigns are deciding to spend their money. Now, take a look at, all right, there's Philadelphia, compared to $13.5 million for Obama. The McCain campaign, even though it had much less money to spend, far less money to spend overall than the Obama campaign, nonetheless dumped in almost the same amount of money in political ads in the Philadelphia metropolitan area, okay? Now let's take a look at where the candidates traveled on the campaign. And if you're trying to draw a comparison in your mind between what the candidates do virtually by political advertising, they appear on people's screens, versus what they do in person, those rallies, like the one we had on the campus last Friday with Joe Biden here, and the ones over the weekend in Philadelphia, they pale into insignificance. The physical appearances by the candidates pale into insignificance by comparison with the number of dollars spent on political advertising by the campaigns. Now, what are the ads? How do they play themselves out? Okay, here's Obama in Germany last summer. He paid a visit to Germany, had a rally near the Berlin Wall. Hundreds of thousands of people turned out to see Barack Obama. Remember, these are people who can't vote in the United States. They don't have citizenship here, so they're not voting. They turned out to see Obama. As a result of that visit, the McCain campaign immediately published this advertisement.
Barack Obama never held a single Senate hearing on Afghanistan. He hadn't been to Iraq in years. He voted against funding our troops. And now, he made time to go to the gym, but canceled a visit with wounded troops. Seems the Pentagon wouldn't allow him to bring cameras. John McCain is always there for our troops. McCain, country first.
I'm John McCain, and I approve this message.
Okay, Obama went to Germany and he didn't have time for American troops because the Pentagon wouldn't let him put cameras in the room. No mention of the fact that Obama had just come from the Middle East, where he spent lots of times with troops in Afghanistan and Iraq. Doesn't matter for the purposes of this political ad, which was specifically designed to counterbalance those pictures of 100,000 plus admiring non-voters in Germany gathered around Obama to hear him speak. That was the way the McCain campaign chose to spend its money at that particular moment in the campaign.
I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message.
Call it country club economics. How many houses does he own? John McCain says he can't even remember anymore. Well, it's 7. No wonder McCain just said the fundamentals of our economy are strong, and anyone making less than $5 million a year is middle class. Maybe McCain thinks this economy is working for folks like him. But how are things going for you?
So this was Obama's retaliation for the attack ads. When he came back from Germany, they had to find something to say about McCain, and they found it, and put these ads on the air. This is the stuff that's appearing for the cost of $145 million in the case of Obama in these various cities. Now, some of the advertising that you've seen on television, and I don't know how much of it you've seen, television stations are carrying ads by people who are not Barack Obama and John McCain, people who are not approved by the two of them, people who are independent of the campaigns.
On March 27, 2004, Barack Obama told a reporter that there were two ministers in his life that he looked to for guidance. One was Jeremiah Wright, his pastor since 1987.
Not God bless America, God damn America!
Barack Obama also named Michael Flager.
I also believe that America is the greatest sin against God.
For 20 years, Barack Obama went to a church where Jeremiah Wright preached racism and hatred of America. The National Campaign Fund is responsible for the content of this ad.
Blah, 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 blah. Okay? Who noticed the picture of the people all standing there saying the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag? What was unusual about that picture? What did you notice about that picture? Who? Obama wasn't covering his heart with his hand. Everybody else in the picture was doing so. Behind the image of Reverend Wright saying, "God damn America," is a picture of American troops in Iraq or Afghanistan fighting somewhere, and the iconic picture of the U.S. Marines raising the flag in Iwo Jima. The design of the ad provides the opportunity for its creators, who are not approved by the McCain campaign, to say and do things on television that the candidates themselves simply wouldn't do. They wouldn't go there. Okay? Just for a second, I know we're talking about the presidential campaign, but the presidential campaign has its effects in other elections around the country as well. If a Republican candidate is winning, other Republicans on the ballot are very likely to do better. If a Democratic candidate is winning, other Democratic candidates on the ballot are likely to do better. Here's what's going on in North Carolina right now, a typically and traditionally long-standing Republican state where a Republican senator who I think has been in office for over a decade, 15, 16 years now, Elizabeth Dole, is on the verge of losing her seat because of the overwhelming power so far of the Obama campaign. Listen to this exchange of television ads.
I'm Elizabeth Dole, and I approved this message.
A leader of the Godless Americans PAC recently held a secret fundraiser in Kay Hagan's honor.
There is no God to rely on. There was no Jesus.
Well, taking under God out of the Pledge of Allegiance, you're down with that.
We're down with that.
In God we trust, you're going to whip that off the money?
Yeah, we would.
Godless Americans and Kay Hagan. She hid from cameras, took godless money. What did Hagan promise in return?
There is no God.
There is no God, she said. Who's she? It's not Kay Hagan's voice at the end of that ad, and the fundraiser was held in her honor. Technically correct. She wasn't there. She didn't endorse it. It was held in her honor. So here's the rebuttal.
I'm Kay Hagan, and Elizabeth Dole's attacks on my Christian faith are offensive. She even faked my voice in her TV ad to make you think I don't believe in God. Well, I believe in God. I taught Sunday school. My faith guides my life, and Senator Dole knows it. Sure, politics is a tough business, but I approve this message because my campaign is about creating jobs and fixing our economy, not bearing false witness against fellow Christians.
Are we down to this? I believe in God. That's my campaign slogan. You know, that's what television advertising has reduced the campaign to in some states in this election. Now, I'm sure all of you are familiar with these two guys, right? Is there anybody who doesn't know who these guys are? All right, good. There might be a few PC users here who don't know who these are, but these are the PC guy and Windows guy and Apple guy, Mac guy in the Apple advertisements. They have used a technique which has prompted Microsoft, the competing company that has built Windows, to devise a similar ad campaign. The director of the Microsoft campaign says, actually, what we want to do is we want to hug to death this idea that the PC can do all the same stuff that the Apple computers can do. And so what they've done at Microsoft is they've started a new ad campaign. You may have seen some of the ads in which they also have the PC guy. And there he is. He's an actual Microsoft engineer made up to look exactly like the Apple version of the PC guy. And the theory behind this ad campaign is, if we claim hard enough to be able to do everything Apple does, people will believe it and they'll buy PCs again. What's the connection to the campaign? Well, if you hug to death the idea that change is what your campaign is about, people will be confused about which of the two candidates are promoting change. And the campaign has been largely about, since August, the campaign between McCain and Obama has been largely about both candidates claiming to be about change. They're tugging on the same ribbon, the same thing. Now, a few minutes ago, we talked about the amount of money spent on television advertising. Who do you think gets all the money? I doubt you've given that a moment's thought, but those 10 stations in Philadelphia, or whatever they are, certainly the three or four major broadcast stations in Philadelphia, the three networks and Fox, let's say, those three stations are wallowing in campaign advertising money right now. For the past year, and especially since August, since the full-fledged campaign after the conventions began, both national conventions have been buying time on their television stations as if there were no tomorrow. There are actually advertisers who want to advertise on those Philadelphia stations. They want to advertise a soft drink or a clothing store or a car dealership or something like that. They can't buy the time because the candidates have bought it all out. So the thing to remember, and this is the sort of behind-the-scenes type of thing, is the news media, the media that carry these ads, are owned by corporations that are making money when the candidates spend this much money on campaigns. And take a look at what else has changed and made this a historic election since 1960. Back in the day, as early as I was able to find 1983, there were 50 different media organizations in the United States. Well, in the years between 1983 and 2003, those 50 organizations have been reduced to just 5. 5 corporations own most of the media in the United States today. Almost all of the media that you watch is owned by these 5 corporations. And make note of who they are. And I don't want to belabor the point, but ask yourself, if you were on the board of directors of the Disney Corporation, your primary concern would be about theme parks and Mickey Mouse and selling cartoons and merchandise at the mall, at the Disney store, and the Little Mermaid and all that stuff you know your younger brothers and sisters are paying attention to. That would be your primary concern. You wouldn't be sitting there at the board meeting at the Disney Corporation every day asking yourself, I wonder if ABC News is devoting the right amount of time to our election campaign. Do they have enough resources? Are there good reporters? Do they have enough technology? They're not thinking about those questions. They're thinking about other issues. Bertelsmann is a company based in Germany, which owns many media around the world these days and owns a lot of American media. They're not sitting there caring about whether the news organizations they own in the United States are doing the right thing for American voters. They're concerned about whether they're making money. And they're concerned about raking in that political campaign advertising. And the News Corporation is owned by a former Australian media mogul, Rupert Murdoch, who also owns Fox, and a number of other conservative media in Australia, in Britain, and elsewhere around the world, and of course owns Fox News here. So the companies that own and are benefiting from this advertising bonanza are just a few companies with other interests other than your interest in getting the right information you need to make accurate decisions. And by the way, is anybody trying to say, you know what, let's do away with all this outrageous media advertising spending. Let's get rid of this. It's grotesque to spend this much money on those kinds of television ads. Nobody's saying that in the media that own the companies that own the media. On the contrary, they are lobbying American senators and congressmen regularly and hard to prevent any change in the campaign finance rules that would prevent or would diminish the amount of advertising that occurs on American television during political campaigns. One example, and Obama was not there in 2003, I believe this was 2000 when I got this particular bit of data, but McCain had been in the Senate for a long time and actually had worked on campaign finance rules. Remember, that's one of his claims to fame. But his top 10 fundraising people include a lot of media people. Do the media have an agenda? Do they care about whether the campaigns are able to spend this much money on advertising? Do they care? Are you kidding? Is the Pope Catholic? Of course they care. Here's why they care. They own newspapers around the United States, and newspapers which are failing, as I mentioned earlier, are dying to own television stations. But there's an old rule that says if you own a newspaper in this market, you can't own a television station. Those rules are changing. Members of Congress have changed them, largely at the behest of these media corporations that are asking for those changes to take place. The media don't want Congress to impose limitations on what you can see on TV. Sex and the City is just the surface. You know, Sopranos is just the surface. That's what you can see. You couldn't air Sopranos on broadcast television in the United States because it's too violent and too sexy. The broadcasters are interested in preventing those regulations from taking effect. They want to get rid of those regulations. Several times people have suggested, why don't we just outlaw political advertising and give all candidates a fixed amount of free time on television in the United States, let them talk it out in whatever way they want to talk it out, but they don't have to pay for it, and they're limited in the amount of time they get. Broadcasters aren't interested in that. They lobby against it on Capitol Hill. All those bucks would dry up in Philadelphia and elsewhere around the United States. In fact, as recently as the late 1990s, those 5 media companies spent $11 million just to target those free media time bills that were being proposed in Congress, because they don't want to kill the golden goose that applies to them. Now, let's get to what you really care about. We've been talking about broadcast and old media. Let's talk about the internet for a few minutes. It's had an enormous effect on the campaign in ways many of you might not have thought about. This is a cover of New Yorker magazine that appeared on New Yorker in the summer. It was not internet media, it was old media, it was a magazine, and almost nobody in the United States reads magazines anymore by comparison with watching broadcast or even watching the internet. But this cover planted an enormous subliminal message that was picked up by the internet, by the blogs, by the email, I call them the pajama brigade, sit around in their pajamas late at night and they capture these things on the web and send them to all their friends on their email lists. And it created the idea among many Americans that Barack Obama not only was a Muslim, but was friends with Osama bin Laden there, hanging in a picture on the right-hand side of the Oval Office, and that all he really wanted to do, he and get Michelle in the Oval Office there, and this was going to be a revolutionary 1960s or 50s style African-American revolution in the Oval Office. That message got spread on the internet, even though very few people actually read The New Yorker. It got spread so widely that eventually the media you guys watch, The Daily Show, picked it up and has done a number of things on it over the course of the campaign. It ended up on another magazine, which is actually more widely read, entertainment magazine. And so it spreads through the internet like a wildfire. And those wildfires can sometimes erupt in strange ways during the campaign itself.
My wife and I are expecting our first child April 2nd, next year. Thank you. And frankly, we're scared. We're scared of an Obama presidency, and I'll tell you why. I don't want to bring a child up in a country where, well, I love this country. We'll bring our child up here no matter what. But I'm concerned about someone that cohorts with domestic terrorists such as heirs, and who he will choose for the Supreme Court should those openings become available. So, could you address how would you go about selecting the next Supreme Court justices?
Thank you. First of all, I want to be President of the United States, and obviously I do not want Senator Obama to be. But I have to tell you, he is a decent person and a person that you do not have to be scared as President of the United States. Now, look, if I didn't think I wouldn't be one heck of a lot better president, I wouldn't be running, okay? And that's the point. That's the point.
The wildfire of Barack Obama being a Muslim who was cohorting was the quote from the individual you saw there. I think what he meant was cavorting or something with terrorists was one of those subliminal messages that erupted at a campaign rally, and McCain himself had to shut it down. A few minutes later, it erupted again.
I got to ask you a question. I do not I can't trust Obama. I have read about him, and he's an Arab. He is not. No?
No, ma'am. He's a decent family man, citizen that I just happen to have disagreements with on fundamental issues, and that's what this campaign is all about. He's not. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, so that's how the underground nature of the web finds its way into the above-ground nature of the campaign. And for a few minutes, I'd like to show you some of the aspects of the underground media that you may or may not be aware of what kind of impact they're having on the campaign. Early in this campaign, it actually started way back in March, but this article was published in May. There was a series of complaints from Obama supporters that John McCain really isn't eligible to run for president of the United States because he was born in the Panama Canal. And you may or may not know this, but the Panama Canal is not a state. And so the Constitution says you have to be a natural born American citizen, and people raised objections to McCain's candidacy. Never mind the fact that the man had served as a POW fighting in a war on my behalf anyway, before you were born, certainly, and has an illustrious military career and illustrious political career in Congress. There he is, by the way, in the arms of his granddad in Panama Canal. So this item was circulated on the web, in email and elsewhere, and it ended up emerging above ground on the official Obama website. Now, this website is one that is paid for by Barack Obama's campaign. So it's the official website, and they open it up to blogs so that you can go on there and comment anything you want about the campaign. And sure enough, somebody got on the official Obama blog and raised this issue about John McCain's birth records. The fact that the guy can't spell or can't write properly is a different issue, but the point is it gets above ground when it circulates around the web. Now let's look at the reflection on the McCain side. After, of course, Obama supporters raised the birth issue with McCain, naturally, it would be expected that McCain supporters would do the same thing with Obama, and they did. This guy wrote a book called Obama Nation, and in several interviews on Fox News, he said things like, Obama's birth certificate isn't a real birth certificate, it's a phony, and even went so far as to assert that there has been good analysis of it on the internet. I mean, the internet is where you go for good analysis of anything, isn't it? So that's where it's got marks of Photoshop on it, all right? So that appears on television. It gets picked up as a blog item, and other aspects of this underground thing get picked up. The fact that he's a Muslim, questions about his religion. Another blogger picks up the idea that Obama is actually an antichrist figure because that's what it says in the Bible. This is back in March, okay? That one gets picked up later in the campaign, as recently as July, revived again. His birth certificate can't possibly be real because the Hell General Hospital doesn't issue birth certificates, and, you know, this stuff gets forwarded and forwarded and forwarded and repeated until finally an organization like factcheck.org has to fly out to Hawaii, physically go to the hospital, require or ask that the hospital provide them the opportunity to physically touch the birth certificate so they can determine whether this seal is actually a raised seal or a photoshopped phony seal. And they go ahead and they look at it, they post it on the web, and all of this just gets churned around underground. It's not part of Obama's official advertisement. It's not part of McCain's advertisement. Has nothing to do with all that money being spent on the media, but gets on the media because it's out there and it's discussed on the news channels. Then you have the unauthorized campaigners. These are the people who are not authorized by any political party or any political group. They're just people like you and me who've decided to do what they want to do on the web.
thank all of you for your time, your suggestions, your encouragement, and your prayers. And I look forward to continuing our conversation in the weeks and months to come.
Hey B, it's me. If you're there, pick up. I was just watching you on C-SPAN. Anyway, call me back.
You seem to float onto the floor. Democratic Convention 2004. I never wanted anybody more.
I never wanted anybody more than you. How many times have you girls called your boyfriend and said, I was just watching you on C-SPAN? 10 million views for this video. Now, some of them are probably guys who have watched it over and over again, admittedly. Okay? But CNN would pee in its pants if it had 10 million viewers for something like that, you know? Another unauthorized viewer, this one was watched more than 4 million times in just the last month, the month of October.
The United States Constitution provides a provision for a candidate running for president that the person must be 35 years of age, live in this country for 14 years, and also be a natural-born citizen. Barack Obama is not a natural-born citizen and therefore not qualified to be a candidate or to be elected president of the United States. As a lifelong Democrat, I'm really dismayed that Obama will not produce records to prove me wrong. On the Obama campaign website, the certification of live birth has also been placed on factcheck.org, which supposedly checks out documents to make sure they're correct. They say it's a true and correct document. But it's very funny because the document, if you look at them, there are two different documents that were posted. I'm not even sure if they're there right now because on Fact Check they had a seal on the document that was posted on Obama's website. They didn't have a seal. But factcheck.org is owned by Annenberg of Chicago. Annenberg of Chicago is an organization that Obama sat on the board for a number of years, dispersing up to $60 million a year. So there's a little conflict of interest there, I believe.
That actually goes on much longer than this, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of flavor of it. And you can sit there and you can say, dismiss this. Oh, it doesn't matter. It's not official. I don't believe any of this stuff. But 4 million people clicked on it and deliberately chose to view it in the course of the last month. Now, of course, you all saw this one. Can you tell which one is the real one? I've watched it enough now to be able to tell, but it's pretty close. And Tina Fey's impersonations have been watched by more than 50 million people in the United States. So the impression of those 50 million people in the United States about the vice presidential candidate for the United States on the Republican Party tomorrow is shaped in some considerable measure, I would argue, by this completely unofficial. I don't think Tina Fey would even claim to be a campaigner. She's not campaigning for or against anybody. She's just making money doing a good impersonation. But that's how this unofficial media is occurring all around itself. Now, I want to tell you a little bit of a story here. This is going to take a few minutes to tell, but it's a wonderful illustration of how the new media infiltrates and affects the old media, which then goes on to affect the way you, the voters, see the particular political campaign. Remember, you may not remember this because you may not have been following the campaign this early, but last spring, Obama gave a fundraiser in San Francisco to which he invited people to donate funds to his campaign. The requirement was that in order to get a seat at that table, in order to get into the room, it was a private event, not out in a football stadium, in order to get into the room, you had to pay $2,300, which is the maximum contribution allowed under law for a political candidate in an election year. So Obama sold tickets to this fundraiser, then he went there and he spoke, and people paid good money to get in there to hear what he had to say. During the course of that fundraiser, the campaign announced that no press would be admitted to this event. People like me with a press credential, people who've covered Obama for months and months, people who covered McCain, none of those people would be able to get in and hear what Obama had to say to these fairly substantial, I think you would agree, contributors to his campaign. This woman, Mayhill Fowler, who, by the way, is 61 years old, and it dispels in my mind the myth that all bloggers are people under the age of 30 or something like that, in case anybody was thinking that. Mayhill Fowler paid $2,300. She is an Obama supporter. She's been supporting him for a very long time. She's been writing about him, supporting him on her blog. It's not her blog, actually. She writes for the Huffington Post. And she paid her money, went into the event, carried a tape recorder with her, and heard Obama say about people in central Pennsylvania, they get bitter. They cling to their guns or their Bibles, or their religion, or antipathy for people who aren't like them. It's become known as the bitter remark of Obama in the campaign. Now, everybody heard that in the fundraiser. There were no press there, so the press didn't hear it at all. There were no newspaper reports about it, no broadcast reports, no web reports, no reports about this whatsoever. Mayhill Fowler sat on the quote for a week, and at the end of the week, she calls up her editor at the Huffington Post and says, you know, I heard Obama say this at the fundraiser last week. What do you think? Is it worth publishing? And the editor said, sure. So Mayhill Fowler wrote it up, put it on her blog, and it took off like a wildfire. That was a Friday night when it appeared on the Huffington Post blog that Obama was dissing mainstream Americans in middle America who cling to their Bibles and to their guns, okay? That's the thrust of it. The next morning, Saturday morning, in South Carolina, at the Hillary Clinton campaign, the battle was still going on between Obama and Clinton, the Clinton campaign handed out stickers, printed stickers, for people to wear that said, I'm not bitter. In other words, the Clinton campaign took an event out of the underground, brought it into the above ground, made it part of the official campaign, and distributed the stickers for that during the course of her next day's event. Mayhill Fowler told a journalist interviewer later, who asked her, how could you go in there on the grounds of having paid your money to support Obama and then write about it on your blog when no press were allowed? She just said, you know what? On the internet, there aren't any rules. And you know what? She's right. There are no rules on the internet. So anything you see on the internet, you've got to take with 10 million grains of salt. One more anecdote like that one. Hillary Clinton flying to South Dakota. She's going to have a series of campaign events in the spring. She has her traveling press corps with her on the plane. They land in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She schedules a meeting with newspaper editors, the editorial board of the Sioux Falls, South Dakota newspaper. In order for her traveling press corps to get to the main event of the campaign that day, a rally, they leave the plane, go to the rally, she goes to the newspaper. Her press corps is not at the newspaper editorial board event. The editorial board sits around a conference table, maybe a dozen or so reporters and editors at the newspaper, asking Hillary Clinton questions. She's trying to solicit their endorsement of the newspaper for her candidacy. The newspaper decides to put a webcam in the middle of the table, of the conference table, so that other people in the newspaper can hear what Hillary Clinton has to say. They couldn't fit everybody in the conference room. The New York Post, a newspaper in New York City, discovers the webcam on the web, listens to the entire event, and hears Hillary Clinton talking about the fact that she's not dragging out the campaign into June. We all remember that my husband Bill campaigned until June, and we all remember that Bobby Kennedy was killed during the primary campaign in June. She's saying it's not unusual to be going till June, no big deal. The New York Post writes about it. Obama picks up the New York Post version of the website that night, that same day, publishes a response, issues a public statement from the Obama campaign about her response, because his campaign interpreted what she said as being an implication that he might get assassinated, like Bobby Kennedy, which would be a pretty bad thing to say. And Hillary Clinton's press corps, which is now meeting her at the rally, is completely unaware of the fact that Obama is claiming Hillary is saying he might get assassinated. The press corps doesn't even know about this whole thing. All of New York knows about it. The rest of the country all knows about it. The press corps most informed, most able to make a judgment about whether this makes any sense or not, is unable to do it. That's how the underground gets above ground into the above ground media. Thanks for your attention.